האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening. Dobro V'Yetcher, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha V'Zot HaBracha. This coming Shabbos and Yontif, we're going to be reading lots of different things, but of course, we're going to finish the Torah, God willing, on Simchas Torah with the reading of V'Zot HaBracha, the last Parsha in the Torah. So we are we're going to learn together, Os Ches, the section number 8. Before we begin, let's take a look at two psukim from Parshas V'Zot HaBracha. This is Parak Lamed Daled, psukim Hey and Vav. It talks about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayomas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem, and Moshe, the servant of Hashem, died there. Be'eretz Moav, in the land of Moav, Al Pi Hashem, according to the word of Hashem. Pasuk Vav, Vayikbor Oso Vagai, and Hashem buried him in the valley, Be'eretz Moav, in the land of Moav, Mul Beis Peor, across from the place called Beis Peor, V'lo yoda ish es kivuraso, and no man knew his burial place, ad hayom hazeh, until this day. So Moshe's actual burial location was kept a secret, was kept a mystery and a secret. Let's jump right into the Zera Shimshon Os Ches. Vayikbor Oso Vagai. So the Zera Shimshon starts with one of the two psukim we just read, and Hashem buried Moshe in the valley. Sorach Ion, this requires analysis. Loma Dafka le Moshe, why specifically regarding Moshe? Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu likbor oso hu be'atzmo levado. Did Hashem wish to bury him completely and absolutely by himself? Why is it that Hashem wished to bury Moshe alone without anyone else being there? In other words, certainly Hashem could have arranged for Yehoshua to be there. One might have thought that was very appropriate for Yehoshua to be there. Moshe's older siblings had already passed away. We know that Miriam had died and Aaron had died, but Moshe's student who never left his side, Yehoshua, could have come and been there as well and participated, but Hashem chose to bury Moshe with no one else, no human beings present. And the Zera Shimshon is saying, why? Why was that the case? V'yesh lomar, we can say, the Omrina beperak Zayin dis Sanhedrin. We say in the seventh chapter of the Talmudic tractate of Sanhedrin, de kivura mishum kapara mishum bizyone. The Gemara over there actually asks a question, which is, why is it that we bury people? Is it because of kapara? Is it because of atonement, that the act of putting a person's body into the ground and returning it to the dust or the dirt is a type of kapara? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Umishum bizyone, or is it because if we were to leave a person's body out unburied, and the body were to start to decompose, that would be a disgrace. And in order to spare the body and the neshama of the body and the family, for that matter, of the disgrace of having the body just being unburied and decomposing, we bury it. So the Gemara poses that question and tries to bring different proofs to support one versus the other. On the Gemara's suggestion that it's because of atonement, Rashi explains that the neshama feels connected to the body after death, and the neshama is aware of what's happening to the body, and so to speak, stays close to the body. And when the neshama sees that the body is being lowered into the grave, it experiences pain. And that sa'ar, that pain, brings kapara, brings atonement to the neshama. So that's how, there are other explanations to what that means, the atonement, but that's how Rashi explains it. And again, the Gemara asks, which one of those two reasons is the reason for burial? And then we continue, K'moshe echrichu sham hatosvos. Tosfos proves over there on that Gemara, in the commentary of Tosfos, it proves this sarvaihu isnaihu. Both of them are present, meaning that we bury people, in order to accomplish both of those goals, the goal of bringing kapara, of bringing atonement to the person's neshama, and also of bringing, of sparing the disgrace and humiliation of having an unburied body, we bury the body. So both goals are intended, and both goals are accomplished according to Tosfos. V'ha'ikar hu mishum kapara. Zera Shimshon says the main reason is to bring atonement. Kishehu roeh shemoridin oso umashpilan oso. When the soul sees that the body is being lowered and being is being descended into the grave, yeshlo tsar, the neshama feels pain. Kemoshe perish Rashi ola b'shalom sham, as Rashi explains on the Gemara over there, and as we mentioned a moment ago. Top of the next column. V'hine Moshe Rabbeinu ola b'shalom. Moshe Rabbeinu, on a piece should be upon him. Dichsiv Bey, it was written about him. B'chol beisi ne'amonhu. Hashem said about Moshe, in all of my household, he is the faithful one. Ve'od nikra ish Elokim, and also Moshe is called by Hashem the man of God. V'zocha lalos b'shamayim, and Moshe merited to go to Shamayim sholosh pe'omim arbayim yom. 3 different times Moshe went up in a very miraculous way, in a very unprecedented way. Moshe went up to Shamayim 3 different times for 40 days each time. It is not appropriate that Moshe, it's not even fitting to suggest that Moshe required atonement. Moshe did not require atonement. He had reached the level of purity, kedusha, and tara, purity and holiness, that he did not require the normal experience of being buried by people and having that being a type of atonement. And because of this, because Moshe did not require the usual requirement for a kapara, for atonement that people need, Hashem buried Moshe himself. Kedei lehodia, in order to make it known, shekfuroso lo hayiso lechapara, that Moshe's burial was not for the purpose of atonement. So let's pause here. The Zera Shimshon opened this piece with a very basic question. Why is it that Hashem involved himself in Moshe's burial alone and didn't involve anyone else? No human beings that were present, besides Moshe, of course, but no one else. And the Zera Shimshon has now given his first answer. There's going to be much more to this, but the first answer is that in general, the main purpose for burial, based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Zera Shimshon is teaching us, the main purpose is to bring kapara, to bring atonement. Moshe did not need atonement, and like other human beings, like other people would, and therefore Hashem buried Moshe himself, to demonstrate this fact. Moshe doesn't need the atonement that comes when human beings take a body and bury it in the ground and cover it, and that whole process brings atonement. Moshe didn't need that, didn't require that process. Hashem wanted to make that fact known. It was another way of showing Moshe's uniqueness and his distinction and his absolute spiritual primacy and above all other people, and therefore it wasn't required and it wasn't done. No people were involved in Moshe's burial. Ve'osi shopir lefizeh. According to this, it makes sense. My di amrinan besoto, what Chazal say in Maseches Sota, Av hu atzmo eno yodea heichon kavor. Even Moshe himself did not know where he was buried. So the Gemara makes that statement because the pasuk said no one knows where Moshe was buried, and the Gemara says no one knows, meaning even Moshe did not know where he was buried, which is a bit of a cryptic or unusual statement, because shouldn't Moshe have seen where Hashem took him and where the location where he was buried? But no, the Gemara says, Chazal teach us that Moshe himself was not even aware of where he's buried. Dema bo lahodienu. Zera Shimshon says, what exactly is the significance of this teaching? We've now moved to the next page, top right, a column on the top right. What difference does it make to a deceased person, Leda, to know Mokom Kivuroso, the place of his burial? So Rashi is, Zera Shimshon, is questioning, what is the significance of this teaching that Moshe Rabbeinu did not know the place of his burial? In general, is that something that is important or significant that a person who dies should know the place of the burial? What is this Gemara really teaching us? Ella, but rather, Klomar, what the Gemara means to say is, Shehu lo hirgish klal tsar hakavura. It's coming to teach us that Moshe was completely unaware of the circumstances of his burial and did not feel at all any pain over the burial. His neshama, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama, wasn't aware of the burial taking place and therefore didn't feel any pain of the burial. Shelo ro'a kivro v'lo mikomo. Moshe's neshama did not see his burial and the place of his burial, because it did not require the atonement that comes to neshamas who Hashem arranges for the neshama, or allows the neshama, we might say, to be present and witness the burial and therefore experience pain and tsar and therefore attain kapara, atonement. Moshe didn't need that. And the Zera Shimshon says that's really what the Gemara in Maseches Sota is teaching when it says that Moshe himself did not even know where he was buried. Moshe did not need and was therefore completely spared any awareness of his burial. Next paragraph. Umay disnan sof parakama de sota, that which we learn in a Mishnah in the first chapter of Maseches Sota, lo al Moshe bilvad omru. The Mishnah says that not only did Hashem involve himself in Moshe's death, not only regarding Moshe, ela al kolat tzadikim, but Hashem is involved in the death of all righteous people. Shenemar, as the pasuk in Yeshaya says, v'holach lefanecha tzidkecha, and your righteousness will go before you. Kevod Hashem ya'asfecha, and the honor of Hashem will gather you in. That pasuk is referring to the death of the righteous, of tzaddikim, and it tells us two things: that when tzaddikim die, their righteousness precedes them, and Hashem, the honor of Hashem, the glory of Hashem gathers them in, gathers in their neshama. Vehikshe shom hakol haramaz. And the commentator, the Kol Haramaz, asks on that Mishnah, Shahare Kol Gufa de Masnison, all of this Mishnah itself, Osa Lahashmienu, is coming to teach us Shahakodesh Baruch Hu Nosei Midah Keneged Midah, that Hashem does measure for measure, rewarded Moshe measure for measure. Ubishvil Moshe zocha ba'asmot Yosef, and since Moshe merited to involve himself by bringing the bones of Yosef from Mitzrayim all the way to the border of Eretz Yisrael and making sure that Bnei Yisrael would carry out the burial of Yosef's bones in Eretz Yisrael, because Moshe personally did that and arranged for that. Mishum hachi nisasek bo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is why Hashem involved himself in Moshe's burial. So the Mishnah over there doesn't just teach us that Hashem was involved in Moshe's burial. The Mishnah over there in Sota says the reason that Hashem was involved so personally and directly in Moshe's burial was as a reward, a midah keneged midah, a measure for measure reward for Moshe. So to speak, Hashem basically said to Moshe, because you personally involved yourself in the taking the bones of Yosef and bringing them, you brought them and traveled with them all the way to the border of Eretz Yisrael, and would have brought them in, of course, if Moshe was allowed to go in, but you arranged for them to be taken in by Bnei Yisrael right? Moshe Hashem said, therefore, I'm going to reward you and be personally involved in your burial. The hashta de chazinon, and now the commentator asks, now that we see the aflechol shar hatzadikim moded lahem hakadosh baruch hu kach, the Mishnah continues and goes on to say that Hashem involves himself in the death of all righteous people. In Cain, if so, minolon. From where do we know demashe nisasek bo hakadosh baruch hu? That the fact that Hashem was involved in Moshe's death, hu hayom mishum mido keneged mido, was a special reward for Moshe's involvement with the bones of Yosef. Dilma, perhaps, lo hoya ela mishum zuchuso. Maybe it was only because of Moshe's general merit as an extraordinarily righteous individual, Moshe hu bishar tzadikim, as it is with other tzadikim, according to the Mishnah over there. Va'ayin sham terutzo, and you can look in the commentator Kol Haramaz, and you will see his answer to that question, which the Zera Shimshon is not going to focus on. So let's pause here for a moment, because two things have happened. One thing is the Zera Shimshon has given us, without really pointing it out or giving much fanfare, the Zera Shimshon is giving us a second explanation as to why Hashem involved himself in Moshe's burial, and that is as a midah keneged midah reward for Moshe carrying the bones of Yosef to Eretz Yisrael. So we now have two reasons. The first reason we saw in the beginning was that burial is for the purpose of kapara, of atonement, based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, and Moshe did not require atonement, and therefore Hashem wanted to demonstrate that and say, no people are involved in Moshe's burial. I'm going to handle it myself, because he doesn't need the atonement that comes from a human burial. That was reason number one. Now we see reason number two, based on this Mishnah in Masechet Sota, that says that Moshe, Hashem was involved so directly in Moshe's death and burial because as a reward for Moshe's involving himself in bringing the bones of Yosef to proper burial. And that we've seen now, two reasons. In addition to that, the Zera Shimshon says this question that's being asked is a very important question by the Kol Haramaz, and that is, how can the Mishnah say that Hashem wanted to show us this special reward for Moshe and got involved, therefore, in his death and burial, when the Mishnah goes on to say that Hashem is involved in the death of all righteous individuals and brings a pasuk to support it. So what's going on with that Mishnah? So Zera Shimshon continues, next paragraph. Uledidan, according to us, meaning according to the approach that the Zera Shimshon is developing, near Elomar, it appears that we can say, Shelishar hatzadikim, according to Shelishar hatzadikim, for the other righteous people, meaning for all righteous people besides for Moshe Rabbeinu, Muchrach HaKadosh Baruch Hu lihisasek bohem ba'atzmo. Hashem is, so to speak, compelled to be involved himself. Ulekayim bohem kavod Hashem ya'asvecha, and to fulfill the words of the pasuk, the glory of Hashem will gather you in, will be involved in the death of the righteous people. Aval leMoshe lo hayu muchrach lasos kach. But for Moshe, uniquely, Hashem was not compelled to be involved for that reason. Ilov mishum midah keneged midah. If not for the other reason of Moshe's involvement in the burial of Yosef's bones as a reward as a measure for measure reward. Vehatam, and what is the reason that only regarding other tzaddikim Hashem has to be involved, but not with Moshe? Shehare yadanu, because we know shehatzadik yisod olam. We know from a pasuk in Mishlei that a righteous person is considered yisod olam, the foundation of the world. And when Hashem takes a tzaddik from this world, bishvil avonos Yisrael, because of the sins of the Jewish people, who mazik la'olam, this damages the world. So let's pause here. What the Zera Shimshon is referring to is an idea that when the pasuk in Mishlei says tzaddik yisod olam, a righteous person is the foundation of the world, it means that in the merit of a righteous person, the world exists, and the people in the world can survive and can even thrive all, meaning even the non-Jewish nations of the world, all in the merit of this righteous tzaddik. Obviously, people are not aware of that their well-being and their sustenance depends upon this righteous tzaddik who might be living a very sheltered and closed-off life somewhere, and to the complete and the vast majority of the people of the world would be completely unaware of this tzaddik's existence. Nonetheless, they're benefiting from the tzaddik being in the world. And if the Jewish people, unfortunately, and chas v'sholem, sin to the degree that Hashem says, I have to take away this tzaddik out of the world because of their sins, to bring atonement to them, to the people, then that damages the whole world, because now the tzaddik Yesod Olam is not here. Next paragraph. Va'afim nema d'shamayim va'aretz. And even if we say that the heavens and the earth, einam omdim ela b'zchus Yisrael, even if we bring some of the sources that point out that the universe exists in the merit of Klal Yisrael and they're recognizing Hashem and serving Hashem, in which case certainly no one in the world can complain that a tzaddik is removed from the world because of any sins that the Jewish people did, because nothing in the world would exist without Klal Yisrael. Even if we say that, so let's go to the top of the next column. Sof, in the end, hu chav levonav u'lesalmidav. Nonetheless, it certainly does damage to the children of the tzaddik and the students of the tzaddik, shehem zakayim, who we can assume are innocent people. They're meritorious people. They're righteous. Shahayu shosim batsama estivarov, and they were thirstily drinking in the words of the tzaddik. And now the tzaddik is taken out of the world. So the removal of a tzaddik from this world damages everyone in the world. And it certainly damages the children of the tzaddik and the students of the tzaddik. Va'anon kaimolon b'mitzia daf yud ubiksubis. And we hold in the Gemara in Baba Mitzia and in the Gemara in Meseches Ksubis, hatofes leva al chov, someone who grabs an object for a creditor, b'mokom shechav la'acherim, in a situation in which this will bring a negative result, this will hurt or impair the opportunities for other people, lo kana, then that person who grabbed the object does not acquire it. Va'afilu habal chov asohu shliach litvos, and even if the bal chov, the creditor, makes him his agent to grab the object, he still doesn't acquire it. V'chein hi maskonas hashulchan aruch hoshen mishpat siman kufhei, and this is the conclusion. Similarly, it's not just brought down in the Gemara, but it's brought down in the halacha, in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, in the section Choshen Mishpat, chapter 105. So let's pause here for a moment to understand what the Zera Shimshon is saying. Zera Shimshon is saying that when a righteous person is taken from the world, that does damage to the world, and it also does damage to, certainly very much, to the children and students of the tzaddik. Then the Zera Shimshon says, now let's look into this whole issue of taking something on behalf of a creditor. What's being talked about here, for example, is, let's imagine that person A, let's call person A Ruvain. Ruvain lends $100 to another person named Shimon. And Shimon, the time comes for Shimon to pay Ruvain back the $100. Shimon perhaps doesn't have the money, or he doesn't want to pay back. He doesn't pay back. And Ruvain makes claims against him, and Shimon refuses to pay. So if a person goes, and this is a third person now, let's call this person Yehuda. Yehuda goes and he grabs an object worth $100 from Shimon, and he wants to bring it back to Reuben and say, I got this for you. I grabbed this $100 object from Shimon, and I'm bringing it back to you. So now you'll be paid up. You'll be even Steven. That does not work. And even if, that object has to be returned to Shimon. Reuben can't keep the object because Shimon took it unlawfully and didn't lo kana, he didn't acquire it under the law, and therefore it has to be returned to Shimon. Even though Shimon owes the $100, nonetheless, Yehuda had no right to go grab that object and bring it to Reuven, the Baal Chov, the creditor. And even if Reuven appointed Yehuda and said, you are my shliach, you are my representative, and I want you to go deal with Shimon, who owes me $100, even in that case, if Yehuda grabbed an object worth $100 and brought it back to Reuven, that does not work. Now, the Zera Shimshon is going to make a parenthetical statement about this. Va'af al gav shemei Rashi de Mitzia. And even though when we look at Rashi and Maseches Bava Metzia, Eino nireh kach, it doesn't seem this way, meaning it doesn't seem that this process does not work in a situation when the person is a representative, a shliach of the creditor. Yesh l'saret ba'ad Rashi. There are ways to explain Rashi. Ki hechi de lo yistor didei adidei, in order to not end up with a contradiction upon what Rashi says in one place on the Gemara and what Rashi says in another place. So that little statement is really for the scholars who go and they realize there's a contradiction, a possible contradiction in Rashi, and they learn different ways to resolve that contradiction, and that doesn't have to concern us, because as Zera Shimshon says, that can be worked out. Don't let that bother you. Just focus on the main point, which is, again, to repeat, the main point is that if a creditor is owed money and someone goes and grabs an object from the person who owes the money, that does not work. That is not allowed to take place, and it does not stand under halacha. Ve'im kain, if so, now the Zera Shimshon is going to take that halachic matter and that Talmudic matter and bring it to our situation. Im kain, if so, how can the angel of death, shehu shlucho shel makom, who is a messenger of Hashem, yochol lisvois hatzadik leHakadosh Baruch Hu, how can he grab the soul of a righteous person for Hashem, on behalf of Hashem, bishvil masha chayovim Yisrael, because of things that the Jewish people did, sins that they committed, transgressions that they committed, that made them owe HaKadosh Baruch Hu a debt, which the Malach HaMavis is now claiming the debt by taking the tzaddik soul from this world. How can that happen? V'halo chavu mazik l'chol olam kulo. When the Malach HaMavis takes the tzaddik's neshama, he's going to be damaging and hurting the entire world. And as we mentioned, he's certainly going to be damaging the children and students of this tzaddik. How can the Malach HaMavis be allowed to do so when, according to halacha, such a thing is not allowed? Umishum hachi muchrach. And because of this, meaning because should not be allowed under halacha for the Malach HaMavis to come grab the neshama of a tzaddik in order to pay off the debt, so to speak, of Klal Yisrael because of their sins, the Malach HaMavis should not be allowed to do that, because that taking of the tzaddik's neshama from the world will hurt the world and damage the world. So he's not allowed to do it. So because he's not allowed to do it, Mukhrach sheHakadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmo ya'asvei alav. Therefore, it is Hashem himself who must get involved and take the neshama from tzaddikim from this world in these types of situations. That's why the Zera Shimshon has explained, that's why the Mishnah says that Hashem gets involved not just with Moshe Rabbeinu, but with the taking of the soul of every tzaddik, every truly righteous person who is the Yesod Olam, a foundation of the world, taking that person's neshama from the world. Next paragraph. And this explains how the language of the pasuk is so precise. And your righteousness will go before you. Kavod Hashem ya'asvecha. The honor of Hashem will gather you in. This, of course, is the pasuk from Yeshaya that we saw earlier, that the Mishnah brought down to explain how we know Hashem gets involved in the death of every righteous person. This pasuk shows that there is no reason for the death of the tzaddik. The tzaddik is a totally righteous individual and has not committed sins that would require the person to die, the tzaddik to die. Sheholech tzidko lefanav, and that's what the words mean. The righteousness of the tzaddik go in front of him. They precede him. Before his death, his righteousness precedes him, which means his own actions have not brought about his death, v'lo hayulo lomus, and he shouldn't have died. Oz tzarich dafka, in that situation specifically, it is necessary shekavod Hashem ya'asvehu, that Hashem's honor should come and gather in the soul of the tzaddik. Mashein kein v'Moshe. This is not the case with Moshe. Shehulo meis bishvil avon doro. Moshe did not die because of the sin of his generation. Shahare kol achotim shebedoro, all of the sinners of Moshe's time, kvar mesu bamidbar, they died out in the wilderness. During the years of traveling around the wilderness for a total of 40 years, all of the sinners died out. Uvenehem, and their children, hoyu kulam tzadikim v'chasidim, they were all righteous and pious people, shezochu lirash Eretz Yisrael, who merited, because of their righteousness and their piety, they merited to go in and inherit the land of Eretz Yisrael. So we can't say Moshe died because of their sins. V'im kain, if so, lo hayu mukhrach HaKadosh Baruch Hu lihisasek bo ba'atzmo. Hashem would not have been compelled to be involved in Moshe's death, as he would in that of other tzaddikim, because the Malach HaMavis would not be allowed to take them, as we've explained in the previous paragraph. V'loma osakach, so why did Hashem get involved so directly and personally in Moshe's death and burial? Elavadai, but definitely, shezeh hoya midah keneged midah. This must have been measure for measure because of Moshe's personal involvement with the bones of Yosef, as was stated in the Mishnah that we saw previously. Inami, alternatively, let's go back to our very first reason. Shelo rotza sheyisasku bo shum bria. Hashem did not want any person to be involved in Moshe's burial, lefi shekfuroso lo hayuso mishum kapara, because Moshe's death his burial was not for the purpose of bringing atonement to Moshe, and therefore Hashem wanted to demonstrate that and handle the burial himself. So the Zera Shimshon has come full circle, because now we see that there are two different reasons that the Zera Shimshon previously identified, and both of them work together to explain why Hashem, to give us two reasons why Hashem was involved in Moshe's burial and no one else was involved, why it was exclusively handled by Hashem, either because of the first reason of Moshe's not requiring any kapara, or because of the reason we saw in the Mishnah of Moshe's involvement with Yosef's bones and bringing them to burial in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, for both of those reasons, we can say Hashem was involved in the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yasher koach for learning together in the Zera Shimshon this week, and we look forward again to learning in the Zera Shimshon together next week.